the rise, the strain, and the breaking point. Richard Dreyfuss's name is woven into the history of modern American cinema. For decades, audiences have known him as the brash, young shark expert in Jaws, the alien-believing dreamer in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, the restless music teacher in Mr. Holland's Opus, and the troubled yet brilliant mind in dozens of acclaimed roles. He is an Academy Award winner, a face etched into the fabric of the 1970s New Hollywood movement, and a voice of authenticity who never hid his flaws. But at 77, as Dreyfuss reflects on his long career, one episode continues to haunt him, the on-set breakdown that changed his path forever. It was not a single day or a single outburst, but a slow unraveling under the pressures of fame, addiction, and expectation. To understand that collapse and why it altered not only his career, but his life, we must first trace how Richard Dreyfuss rose to the top, how the weight of success bore down on him, and how the hidden struggles inside Hollywood's brightest young star eventually cracked into the open. From Brooklyn to Hollywood, Richard Stephen Dreyfuss was born on October 29, 1947 in Brooklyn, New York, into a family of modest means. His parents, Norman and Geraldine, moved the family to Los Angeles when Richard was a child. Unlike many young boys of his time, he did not dream of baseball or mechanics. He wanted to perform. From an early age, Dreyfuss showed a love for theater and storytelling. By his teenage years, he was already appearing in local plays and landing small parts on television. Guest appearances on shows like Bewitched, Gunsmoke, and That Girl gave him the first taste of Hollywood's machinery. He was determined, ambitious, and possessed a spark that directors noticed. Dreyfuss wasn't conventionally handsome, but he had something better. An intensity, a nervy energy, a way of making every line feel alive. By the late 1960s and early 1970s, Hollywood itself was changing. The old studio system was collapsing, and a new generation of filmmakers, the so-called movie brats like Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, Martin Scorsese, and Brian De Palma, were rewriting the rules. They sought authenticity, rawness, and realism. In Richard Dreyfuss, they found an actor who embodied that shift. Breakthrough, American Graffiti, and stardom. The turning point came in 1973 with George Lucas's American Graffiti. Playing the role of Kurt Henderson, a young man on the verge of adulthood and unsure of his future, Dreyfuss perfectly captured the anxieties of a generation. The film became a cultural touchstone, and Dreyfuss emerged as one of its brightest stars. From there, his career soared. Spielberg cast him in Jaws, 1975, a role that cemented his reputation. As Matt Hooper, the cocky marine biologist who teamed up with Roy Scheider and Robert Shaw to hunt the great white shark, Dreyfuss delivered wit, energy, and vulnerability. Jaws was more than a blockbuster. It was a cultural phenomenon that forever changed Hollywood. And at its center was a 27-year-old actor whose name was suddenly known across the globe. Only 2 years later, Dreyfuss reunited with Spielberg for Close Encounters of the Third Kind, 1977. As Roy Neary, the everyman obsessed with visions of alien contact, he gave one of the most iconic performances of the decade. The film was a triumph, and Dreyfuss's career seemed unstoppable. Then came The Goodbye Girl, 1977, a Neil Simon comedy drama that showcased his humor and charm. For his performance, Dreyfuss won the Academy Award for Best Actor, at the time, the youngest man ever to receive the honor. He was only 30 years old. In just 4 years, Richard Dreyfuss had gone from bit television roles to Oscar-winning leading man. He was on top of the world, but success for Dreyfuss carried shadows. The hidden struggles. What the public didn't see in the late 1970s was the toll that fame was taking on Richard Dreyfuss. He was still young, still adjusting to the demands of Hollywood, and he carried insecurities that fame could not erase. His Oscar win was supposed to be validation, proof that he had made it. Instead, it brought pressure. In interviews years later, Dreyfuss admitted that he struggled with cocaine addiction during this period. The drug was rampant in Hollywood, a part of the culture, and for Dreyfuss, it became both an escape and a crutch. At the same time, his ego inflated. He was young, rich, acclaimed, and in demand. He believed he could do no wrong, and that belief made the fall even harder. Directors and co-stars began to notice his volatility. He was brilliant, yes, but also temperamental. Some days he was electric on set, other days he was erratic, his moods swinging wildly. He admitted later that he was arrogant, difficult, and often blind to the damage he was causing. The on-set breakdown. By the early 1980s, the cracks were widening. During the filming of Whose Life Is It Anyway? 1981 and The Big Fix 1978, colleagues noticed his erratic behavior. But it was during the production of Stakeout 1987 and other films in that period that his private struggle became undeniable. There were reports of meltdowns on set, moments where his temper flared, where his emotions overwhelmed him, where he simply could not perform. At the time, the details were shielded from the public, but within Hollywood, word spread that Dreyfuss was becoming unreliable. The very energy that had made him a star now made him unpredictable. The breaking point came in 1982, when Dreyfuss crashed his car into a tree while under the influence of cocaine. He was arrested, and the mugshot of the once Oscar-winning star shocked fans. It was no longer a hidden struggle. His addiction and instability were now front-page news. For Dreyfuss, the incident marked the end of the illusion. The man who had risen so high had fallen so fast. The arrest was not just an embarrassment, it was a wake-up call. Consequences for his career. The fallout was immediate. Offers slowed. Hollywood, always quick to turn on its own, began to see Dreyfuss as a risk. Studios questioned whether he could carry a film, whether he was insurable, whether his personal demons would derail productions. At the same time, his relationships suffered. Colleagues distanced themselves, friends worried, and his reputation as a difficult actor hardened. For a man who had once seemed destined to dominate Hollywood for decades, the future suddenly looked uncertain. In retrospect, this period, the late 1970s into the early 1980s, was the turning point of Richard Dreyfuss's career. The on-set breakdowns, the addiction, the arrest, all of it combined to derail his momentum. He would work again, of course, and even find redemption, but he would never again be the unstoppable young star of his 20s. The human cost for Dreyfuss, the breakdown was not just professional, but deeply personal. He later described the years of addiction and instability as a fog, a period when he lost himself. Fame, he realized, had amplified his insecurities rather than erased them. Success had not healed his wounds, it had deepened them. He admitted that he used cocaine to quiet the noise in his head, to silence the doubts and fears that plagued him. But instead of relief, the drug only magnified his problems. The crash in 1982 was both literal and metaphorical, the moment when his illusions shattered. Looking back, Dreyfuss has said that the most painful part of that period was not the loss of roles or the public humiliation, but the recognition of how far he had strayed from the person he wanted to be. Why it matters. At 77, Richard Dreyfuss speaks with remarkable candor about the darkest years of his life. There is no attempt to sweep them aside, no instinct to polish them into something glamorous, and no effort to hide behind the shield of nostalgia. He does not romanticize the spiral of addiction, nor does he excuse the arrogance and volatility that fueled his breakdown. Instead, he calls it what it was, a collapse, one that nearly ended everything he had worked for. For Dreyfuss, that breakdown is not a footnote, but a defining chapter of his story. It represents the moment when the illusion of invincibility was shattered, when the young prodigy who once seemed untouchable discovered that talent alone could not shield him from the consequences of recklessness. He was no longer the golden boy who could do no wrong in Hollywood's eyes. He became, instead, something more complicated and, in many ways, more meaningful, a survivor. The importance of this shift cannot be overstated. Richard Dreyfuss, the prodigy, was brilliant, daring, and undeniably gifted, but also fragile, reckless, and unaware of how fragile success could be. Richard Dreyfuss, the survivor, however, is wiser. He carries the scars of his mistakes, but also the perspective that only comes from rebuilding a life after losing control. That transformation from prodigy to survivor is what gives his later years such resonance. For Hollywood, his story stands as a stark reminder of how quickly the tide can turn. One year, an actor is celebrated as the future of cinema. The next, they are written off as unreliable, a risk too great for studios to take. In Dreyfuss's collapse, the industry saw the fragility of fame, the way brilliance can crumble under pressure, and how unforgiving the machine of Hollywood can be. For fans, however, his story is not simply about loss, it is about resilience. It is proof that a career, even when derailed, can be salvaged through honesty, determination, and courage. His return to meaningful roles, his willingness to confront his demons openly, and his advocacy for mental health have made his journey a testament to survival. And for Dreyfuss himself, the breakdown remains the unvarnished truth, a painful but necessary part of who he is. It is the chapter that stripped him of illusions and forced him to see himself clearly, not as a star, but as a flawed man capable of falling and strong enough to rise again. Redemption. When Richard Dreyfuss's breakdown became public in the early 1980s, many assumed his career would never recover. Hollywood is notoriously unforgiving, and actors once labeled as difficult or unreliable often find themselves exiled from major roles. Dreyfuss had been the youngest actor ever to win the Academy Award for Best Actor, but just a few years later, he was a tabloid headline, reduced to cautionary tales whispered in industry circles. Yet, unlike many who disappeared completely under the weight of scandal and addiction, Dreyfuss fought his way back. His recovery, both personal and professional, was not simple. It required humility, honesty, and the willingness to confront the demons he had spent years avoiding. And in the decades that followed, Dreyfuss transformed from Hollywood's young prodigy to one of its most complex survivors, a man whose candid reflections on fame, failure, and mental health remain as compelling as any role he has ever played. Recovery and reinvention. The crash in 1982 was a turning point. Arrested for drug possession after his car accident, Dreyfuss had to face not only the law, but himself. For a man accustomed to success, the humiliation was immense, but it also forced him into treatment. He entered rehabilitation, determined to break free from cocaine, the drug that had nearly destroyed him. In later interviews, Dreyfuss admitted that sobriety was not easy. Recovery meant stripping away the illusions that fame and drugs had provided. It meant confronting his arrogance, his insecurities, and the damage he had caused to his relationships and career. For the first time, he had to live without a mask. Hollywood, wary of his reputation, did not immediately welcome him back. But slowly, opportunities returned. In 1986, he starred in Down and Out in Beverly Hills, a comedy that proved he could still deliver charm and energy on screen. The film was a hit and Dreyfuss's comeback had quietly begun. Mr. Holland's redemption. The true symbol of Dreyfuss's reinvention came in 1995 with Mr. Holland's Opus. Playing Glenn Holland, a frustrated composer who becomes a high school music teacher, Dreyfuss delivered one of the most heartfelt performances of his career. The role was a mirror of sorts, a man who had dreamed of greatness but found meaning in unexpected places. Critics hailed the performance as a return to form, and Dreyfuss earned an Academy Award nomination for Best Actor. For audiences who remembered his earlier breakdown, the film felt like redemption, proof that the prodigy had not been lost forever. Dreyfuss himself has said that Mr. Holland's Opus was deeply personal. The film's themes of regret, resilience, and finding value in imperfection resonated with his own life. It was not about reclaiming stardom so much as about reclaiming purpose, speaking out on mental health. What distinguishes Richard Dreyfuss from many of his peers is his willingness to speak openly about his struggles. He has never hidden the fact that he battled cocaine addiction, nor has he shied away from discussing his bipolar disorder, diagnosed later in life. In interviews, he has described his mental health struggles as both a burden and a source of his creativity. The manic energy that made his performances electric was often the same energy that destabilized his private life. By talking openly about these issues, Dreyfuss became an advocate for mental health awareness long before it was common in Hollywood. He has said repeatedly that addiction and mental illness nearly destroyed him, but he also insists they shaped his art. His honesty about these subjects has inspired fans who see in him not just an actor, but a survivor willing to reveal the messy truth behind the screen. Later, career and character roles. In the decades since his recovery, Dreyfuss's career has been defined less by leading man stardom and more by rich character work. He has appeared in a wide range of films and television projects, from political dramas to comedies. Roles in The American President, 1995, Poseidon, 2006, and W, 2008, where he portrayed Vice President Dick Cheney, showcased his versatility. Though he never again reached the stratospheric heights of his 1970s stardom, Dreyfuss carved out a career built on resilience and reinvention. He embraced his age, his flaws, and his experiences, allowing them to inform his performances. For audiences, this transformation was compelling. Richard Dreyfuss was no longer the boy wonder of American Graffiti or the obsessive dreamer of Close Encounters. He was something more enduring, a man who had lived, fallen, and gotten back up. The cost of survival always comes at a price, and Richard Dreyfuss has been candid about acknowledging his own. Although his career is long, decorated, and filled with unforgettable performances, his later years have not been free from bitterness. He has often spoken openly about feeling underappreciated by Hollywood, not forgotten, but overlooked. For all the accolades, for all the recognition that came in flashes, he believes his body of work has not received the consistent acknowledgement it deserves. In interviews, he has criticized the industry's shift away from the kind of roles that made him a star. Hollywood, he argues, has become obsessed with youth, spectacle, and blockbuster franchises, leaving little room for the character-driven, dialogue-rich films that define the golden age of the 1970s. Dreyfuss was never a superhero, never an action star with muscles and spandex. He was the everyman, the anxious dreamer, the flawed but fascinating human being. That kind of role, he laments, is now rare. At 77, he is candid about his disappointments. He admits to moments of envy, moments when he has watched his peers land roles that he believed he could have brought to life with equal or greater depth. He has confessed to wondering why his path diverged, why the momentum of his early stardom did not carry him into the pantheon of actors consistently working at the highest levels. Yet in the same breath, he speaks with gratitude. Gratitude for the fact that he survived when many others did not. Gratitude for sobriety, which gave him back control of his life after addiction nearly destroyed it. Gratitude for the chance to continue working, even if the roles are smaller, even if the spotlight is dimmer. He acknowledges that Hollywood nearly abandoned him, but he also points out that he is still here, still creating, still telling stories when so many others faded completely. That balance, the bitterness of disappointment, and the humility of gratitude defines Richard Dreyfuss's later years. Teaching, writing, and advocacy. In recent years, Dreyfuss has chosen to expand his role far beyond the confines of acting. No longer content to be just a performer, he has embraced the role of teacher and mentor. Younger actors, drawn to his honesty and his willingness to share the unvarnished truth about the industry, have benefited from his guidance. He has spoken openly about the dangers of fame, the traps of ego, and the importance of craft above celebrity. In doing so, he has ensured that his own struggles and triumphs serve as lessons for the next generation. Dreyfuss has also turned to writing, producing works that reflect on his life and career with the same intensity that marked his performances. His reflections are brutally honest, sometimes self-critical, often filled with the kind of insights that only come from decades of hard living and survival. He does not shy away from the darkness of his past, nor does he romanticize it. Instead, he uses it to illuminate the complicated journey of an artist who has lived both the highs of stardom and the lows of collapse. Perhaps most strikingly, Dreyfuss has dedicated himself to advocacy outside of the entertainment industry. Through the Dreyfuss Civics Initiative, he has championed the teaching of civics in American schools. For Dreyfuss, the decline of civic education represents a threat to democracy itself. He argues passionately that an informed and engaged citizenry is the foundation of a functioning society, and that without it, democracy withers. This work, he insists, is as important as his acting career. To him, the purpose of survival is not simply to exist or to cling to fame, but to give back. To use his platform for something larger than himself. It is a mission that reflects the lessons of his own life. That brilliance means little if it is wasted. That survival is only meaningful if it leads to contribution. Through teaching, writing, and advocacy, Richard Dreyfuss has carved out a new identity, not just as an actor, but as a mentor, a thinker, and a citizen determined to leave behind more than performances on screen. He wants to leave behind a legacy of honesty, resilience, and civic responsibility. Richard Dreyfuss, at 77, is a man defined not only by the roles he played, but by the battles he fought and the causes he chose. The cost of survival has been disappointment, envy, and the knowledge of opportunities lost. But the reward of survival has been wisdom, perspective, and the ability to use his voice for something greater. In many ways, that may be his most enduring role of all. Reflections at 77. Now at 77, Richard Dreyfuss looks back on a career marked by brilliance and breakdown. He does not shy away from the mistakes. He admits he was arrogant in his youth, reckless with his gifts, and blind to the dangers of addiction. He acknowledges the pain he caused himself and others, but he also embraces the resilience that allowed him to survive. He takes pride in the roles that defined his career, in the honesty with which he has faced his demons, and in the lessons he has shared with others. In his own words, he is not simply an actor who once won an Oscar. He is a man who lived through the fire of fame, burned himself on its intensity, and emerged scarred but stronger. The legacy of the breakdown. The on-set breakdown that nearly ended Richard Dreyfuss's career did not define him, but it did transform him. Without that collapse, there would be no redemption, no advocacy, no Mr. Holland's Opus. The breakdown was both a tragedy and a catalyst, the moment when the illusion of invincibility shattered, forcing him to rebuild from the ground up. For fans, his story is not just about movies, it is about humanity. It is about the fragility of success and the strength required to survive failure. It is about the truth that even our brightest stars carry shadows. Richard Dreyfuss at 77 is not the man he was at 30. He is not the arrogant young star who believed he could conquer Hollywood. He is not the addict who nearly lost everything. He is a survivor, a storyteller, and a voice of honesty in an industry built on illusion. The on-set breakdown that changed his career forever remains a pivotal chapter in his life, but it is not the end of the story. It is the turning point, the moment when Richard Dreyfuss stopped being just a prodigy and became something more profound, a man who lived through failure and chose to rise again. Richard Dreyfuss's story is not simply the tale of a gifted actor. It is the story of brilliance tested by pressure, of a man who rose to the very top, stumbled in full view of the world, and then chose to rise again. His on-set breakdown may have changed his career forever, but it also forced him to confront his demons, embrace honesty, and transform into a survivor who still commands respect at 77. But what do you think? Does Richard Dreyfuss's breakdown tarnish his legacy, or does it make his journey even more inspiring? Proof that resilience matters as much as talent. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to hit subscribe for more untold stories of Hollywood's most fascinating legends. You're watching Icon Legends, where the truth behind the legend is finally revealed.